Hello, my name is David Fonseca Guimaraens. I'm sixth generation at Fonseca Port, the Guimaraens family. And we are here in the Fonseca Lodges in Villanova de Gaia, also in our visitor centre. And Fonseca is a port house with a long tradition in vintage port, in full-body ports, but also a magnificent age-tawny ports. At Fonseca, we have three quintas: Quinta do Penascal in the Tavra Valley and Quinta do Cruzeiro in Santo Antonio in the Pinhão Valley. These are the backbone to all of our ports, but we also work with a number of grape farmers who supply their grapes to us that we make in our wineries. And it is on the basis of all the ports that we make from these different quintas that we put together our magnificent range of Fonseca ports. Today, we're going to be doing a tasting and pairing together. And that's what we propose to do and show how the different styles of port can match different combinations on different occasions. And let's have some fun. Of our range of ports, the white ports that we produce at Fonseca, we produce a dry white port and a sweet white. We're going to taste now the Sirocco dry white port. Sirocco, as a name, comes from the dry winds which come up off the north of Africa into southern Europe, and that's what gave the inspiration to the name of Sirocco dry white port. I like serving Sirocco as an aperitif in three different forms. The first, just on its own, where always chilled. Sirocco is aged for 3 years in seasoned oak, because we're not looking for oak flavor, and we're looking to get some maturity so that you get this wonderful richness and complexity, but it's still youthful and it has this very citrus fruit to it. So on its own, it is rich, it is full, it is round and very refreshing. The second combination I'm going to do is one which is very informal, very casual. I'm going to take some ice, some orange peel, and this is what I call Sirocco on the rocks. It's as simple as that. You get this orange zest which just gives it a lift. This can be really casual, great drink to have at the cocktail bar, refreshing and easy to do. I think this is a form of serving white port which I serve a lot at home. Then the third way is a white port and tonic, a classic which is a wonderful thirst quencher, and just put a touch of lemon rind, a bit of fresh mint, and white port and tonic in the measures similar to what you do in a gin tonic. The third white port and 2/3 tonic. And this is undoubtedly one of the most refreshing thirst quenchers before a meal, really refreshing. So, Fonseca Sirocco dry white port, three great combinations for different occasions, different tastes. On its own, chilled, Sirocco on the rocks with a bit of orange peel. As the ice melts, it just continues to make it refreshing. The orange gives us citrus zest, which is delicious. And white port and tonic, a long drink, doesn't have the same alcohol as the gin, so it's really nice to drink without having too much alcohol in it, or with some delicious dried roasted almonds from the bottle. Cheers. Fonseca Bin 27 is our flagship port for Fonseca. It's a full-bodied port, very fruity, very rich. And it is a port that, when my father, Bruce Guimaraens, launched it in 1970, his intention was to put in a glass of port for day-to-day drinking, a port which has all of the richness and intensity of a young vintage port. And that's exactly what Bin 27 is, and which we work very hard to ensure we maintain that standard, is a port which stands out for its intensity of young blackcurrant berry fruit, and extremely full and rich on the palate. It is young, and we want it to be young. We're talking about a 2.5-year-old port because we want this berry fruit to be youthful and fresh. And that's what makes it the perfect combination at the end of the meal, either with what we have here, which is a really delicious chocolate cake, where the richness of the chocolate is rich, it's full, will combine perfectly with the tannins and the fullness of this full-bodied Bin 27 port. And this combination of chocolate and Bin 27 is excellent. But in the same way, if you want to, instead of the chocolate, serve it with the cheese is also very intense. And the beauty of the Bin 27, with its intensity of fruit, which is fullness on the palate, with its firmness of tannins, is that will cleanse the palate after either your chocolate or a cheese, which will just make you want to go back for another mouthful and another glass. Late bottle vintage is a full-bodied port from a single year, and here we have the 2015 late bottle vintage. And this is a port that will start off young and fruity and very intense, but by aging in these large wooden vats, it will age slowly, and the young berry fruit will mellow, it will become a bit more complex. At Fonseca, LBV is very much a specialty that we do. We bottle it as an unfiltered port because we're not worried that it might throw a bit of sediment over time. We want it to hold on to all of its richness. This is ports which are made in our traditional method of foot treading. So it's the ports that after a vintage get set aside for a late bottle vintage. It is complex, it is smooth, and that makes such a good combination with a cheese like we have here. You can explore different cheeses, but for this port, LBV, I've chosen this delicious brie. The richness of the fruit, a lot of tannin, but they've softened, and a very, very long finish. What a great combination. The aged tawnies are such a delicious way of finishing a meal with your dessert. And here we have a caramelized pudding, which balances and matches an aged tawny so perfectly. So you get the rich creaminess of the pudding. And then these beautiful dried fruit aromas of the tawny, and the softness that they get with the aging in wood, which makes the tawny ports so appealing. Very easy to drink, very informal, and very relaxed. I enjoy serving an aged tawny on an occasion where you just want something to accompany what you're eating, where you don't have to think too much about what you're serving. That's where I think the aged tawnies are a perfect match at the end of the meal. The other combination, which is natural with any port, and here it is very much more flexible, but it is cheese. And here we have a really delicious manchega, which is a cheese which has got fairly rich flavor, but not overly intense. And with the tawny, at the end of the meal, that is such a pleasant way of finishing your meal. Your aged tawny to lubricate the conversation, and your cheese to make sure it's not on its own. Vintage port is all about taking these extraordinary wines from a single year, will be bottled 2 years after the harvest, and it will be bottled with no filtration at all. It's exactly just what nature gave us. Makes that every bottle of vintage is a time capsule. It will capture the character of the year. It will capture our work that we have done. But as such, as it ages in the bottle, it will throw sediment. So the vintage port needs to be decanted before it is served. Vintage port will have a different taste profile depending on its age. A young vintage port in its first 6 to 10 years in the bottle will be essentially an expression of fruit, intensity of fruit. The vintage port, when it is young, it's got so much structure, so much dimension, so much tannin that the fruit expression is its main character. Then, as it ages in the bottle, in a reductive atmosphere, so in absence of oxygen, the structure, the tannin will sediment out into the bottom of the bottle, and it will develop these bottle maturity aromas, which makes a vintage port so attractive. And the older it gets, the more mellow it becomes, the more complex it becomes. And if you then go to the second phase of its aging, I normally say between 10 and 20 years of age, that is a very interesting phase also in vintage port, because you will combine still a lot of freshness of youth, but you get your first complexities of bottle maturity. Then from your 20 to 40 years of age, that's where your bottle maturity becomes your main aromas, your main characters, but you still have plenty of youth behind. Then I normally say after 45, 50 years of age, then that's where vintage port becomes extraordinarily complex. They don't have a lot of color, but they are so rich and so fine. And drinking vintage port can be an adventure of not only discovering the year, the port house, how it is aging, or what phase it is in its development, which makes vintage port a great wine to be enjoyed by any wine enthusiast, any wine lover, a port to discover on his own or to share with a group of friends around a table. I enjoy drinking vintage port right at the end of the meal. Normally when you've finished all of your desserts and you just want maybe a bit of cheese, and well, here we have a great Stilton cheese, which is a natural combination. Bit of Stilton, your vintage with the delicious Stilton cheese makes such a great combination. What a great combination. Stilton cheese with a vintage port. You get the intensity and the power of a Stilton, but vintage port is a great match. You get the intensity, the power of the vintage, and they really go well side by side. We're drinking here the Guimaraens 2008 vintage port, which is 12 years old, 10 years in the bottle. So it's beautiful, scented, first signs of bottle maturity, but it's got youth, it's got freshness. What a combination. Vintage port, because it does its aging in the bottle, that's why we recommend you decant it to take it off its sediment and then let it breathe for a couple of hours before being served. And the vintage port, we normally recommend that you drink it within 24, 48 hours after the bottle being opened. Naturally, a younger vintage will keep its characters for longer. A very old, mature vintage, you really want to drink it within the first day of having opened it. And that's how you'll get the most enjoyment. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this tasting the way I have. It's been fun, but then this is what I love to do. It has been a huge pleasure for me. This year I'm celebrating my 30th year since I came back home to make these magical ports. And I have no doubt that port can give you many pleasure on many an occasion. Choose whichever style of port, depending on what occasion you're having. But there is one thing that I am certain of. There is no occasion which port should not be served. Enjoy. Cheers.